Hi everybody, welcome to my presentation on the economic mineralization of the Otavi mountain lands, with a particular interest in the Shudi deposit, as that is the deposit that we will be touring when we are in the country. Before we start, we need to get oriented. The Otavi mountain lands themselves are located in the north of Namibia. The mountains themselves are one of the richest and most important mining districts in the country, and they are also incredibly important from an agricultural perspective. The area gets above average precipitation as far as the country of Namibia goes, and the soil is incredibly fertile, leading to its other name of the Golden Triangle or the Maize Triangle. Within the area, there are over 600 mineral occurrences as of 1997, and that number has undoubtedly grown in the last almost 30 years. As you can see here in this map, every red triangle is one of those occurrences. The occurrences are primarily copper, lead, and zinc, and other base metals that are found in the area. Of the 600 mineral occurrences, there are also many prevalent and notable mines in the area. The most famous of which is the Tsumeb mine, which is very well known for its really beautiful mineralization. It is often found in museums across the world, samples from the mine that is, but the mine itself is primarily lead, copper, zinc, with silver and germanium as well. That is in the north of the triangle. It makes up the northern point. Combat in the south is copper, lead, silver. Bergaucus in the east is lead, zinc. It's interpreted to be an early MVT style deposit with subsequent supergene enrichment of the lead and zinc. Abenab, just to the northwest of Bergaucus, is primarily vanadium, secondarily lead, and Shudi to the east of Tsumeb, within the small Malden Group formation, is copper, and that is the deposit that we will be touring shortly. Before we talk about the mine itself, it's important to understand the history of the area and how the area came to be under German control. Three groups originally inhabit the area. These are the Ndongo in the north, the Herero to the south, and that first group within the Otavi mountainlands themselves. Now, the first group is part of the Coeco language, which is very distinct for its clicks. So those two lines do not represent L's. It is not the high yom or the high lom. They represent a lateral click, so it's properly pronounced high om. They were the original people who lived within the lands and extracted the copper and traded it to the north with the Ndongo. They are also often referred to in historical accounts as the Bushmen. Now, that gray box, Uppingtonia, is a colony of Trek Boers. Trek Boers were a semi-nomadic people of Dutch and German descent from the original South African colonists. They primarily grazed cattle, and William Worthington Jordan, a elephant hunter and guide in the area, originally from Cape Colony, encountered a group of Trek Boers, and with them settled in Uppingtonia. Now, Jordan purchased the land from Chief Kambonde of the Ndonga. He never outright discussed the mineral rights, and Kambonde likely let him live in the land, but did not give him permission to mine it. Jordan agreed to these terms, but he turned around and was in contact with the German colonial authority and told him his expressed interest, or told the authority his expressed interest, to give the land to the Boers and keep the mineral rights for himself. In 1886, while trading to the north, Jordan was killed by Chief Nahale. Upon his killing, the German colonial authority was in contact with the Boers and offered them protection in exchange for becoming German substituents and allowing the area to come under the control of the German colonial authority. The Boers accepted, but the Germans could not extend their power that far north at this point, and so the Boers slowly dissipated. It's during this time of the area's history that the Herero become more and more important. Chief Mahahero had a British friend named Robert Lewis. Robert Lewis was granted by Mahahero the mining rights to some of the Otavi copper mines. When the German colonial authority claimed the area for themselves, Robert Lewis fought them legally. Eventually, he fled to the UK after being essentially kicked out of the country by the Germans and attempted to sue them. Because of this, the first British-German joint venture, the SWACO Corporation, was formed and led to the first geologists investigating the area. Now, in these first accounts, this is where we see them make note of the Bushmen, as during this time, the Haigom are still within the area and still mining the copper, and they're actively asserting their right to continue their way of life. And the chief geologist of the first expedition says that he can't understand how these people don't understand that this land doesn't belong to them anymore now that the Germans and British own it. By 1900, the British-German relationship had almost completely deteriorated, and the SWACO was abolished in favor for the OMEG. They had sunk multiple test shafts and determined that the area was feasible for mining, and this, in no small part, led to the Herero Nama uprising, where the Herero, in hand with Nama, fought against the German colonization. This uprising took place from 1904 to 1908, and during the course of it, roughly 80% of the Herero population was killed, and 50% of the Nama population. At the end of this, there was no opposition left to German colonial rule, and there was no opposition to the mining of the area. In 1906, upon the completion of a railway to the coast, full-scale production had started. After World War II, German Southwest Africa, as it was known, was taken control of by South Africa. This opened the area up to Western investment, specifically American investment, which led to the formation of the Sumab Corporation. Under the Sumab Corporation's ownership of the area, production expanded rapidly, and the Sumab smelter, which we will be talking about in other presentations, or which will be talked about in other presentations, was built. As operations continued in the mine, there were many, many labor disputes, most notably in 1971, 1972, which corresponded with the general labor strike organized by the SWAPO, which was a fight against apartheid and for the independence of Namibia. In 1990, when Namibia gained its independence, labor disputes continued against the corporation and the mine, which eventually led to the closure of the mine itself in 1998 and the liquidation of the Sumab Corporation as a whole. Since the liquidation of the Sumab Corporation, most of the assets in the area have been passed hand to hand, with ownership changing very often. But today, ownership has mostly stabilized, with Trigon Metals owning and operating the Combat Mine, Sino Mine Resources operating the Sumab smelter in the area, and Consolidated Copper Corp owning and operating Shudi, the Bergaucus, the Matchless, and the Otijase mines. So now that we understand a history of the area, let's talk about the geologic history of it. So the area itself is primarily composed, or primarily rests within, the Damara origin. It exists in the northern portion of it. In this figure, it is in the NP near the GI area. This is the northern mobile platform, which is primarily composed of cryogenian carbonates. The GI is the Grootfontein Inlier. It's a paleotopographic high, which is interpreted to have had some impact on the movement of orogenic and basinal fluids, which led to the deposition of all of the base metal occurrences that we see within the area. The local geology of the area is primarily composed of the Nosib group, which is the lower unit, the Otavi group, which is the middle unit and the most prevalent unit in the area, and the Malden group, which is the upper unit and primarily exists within regional synclines. The no subgroup is a package of rift-related silicic and metavolcanics that's interpreted to have formed about 780 to 740 million years ago. Its formation is interpreted to have occurred as the infilling of rift-related valleys that formed during the Cryogenian breakup of Rodinia. The Otavi group, which overlies the no subgroup, is a package of shallow water carbonates that formed on an inland splay of the Adamastor Ocean. To take a quick tangent, Adamastor is a fictional Greek deity that was made up by a Portuguese poet as a god who was conquered by the Portuguese as they sailed past the Horn of Africa. The group itself is composed of two subgroups, the Abinab, which is the lower, and the Sumeb, which is the upper. These two subgroups are separated by the Gob Formation tillites, and I believe Dr. Laybourne will be talking more about those when he talks about the snowball Earth. The two units are fairly similar in lithology, both being composed of massive and bedded dolomites. The primary sign of life within these dolomites is stromatolites, as we are cryogenian and Precambrian, so we don't see any complex life yet. And there are also ooids in this, which indicates that this was in a tropical environment. The Malden group overlies the Otavi group. They are non-conformable units, as there is an angular unconformity between the Malden and the Otavi. The Malden is most well known for being the host of most of the deposits in the area, as it is the Malden conglomerates that infill the Otavi karsts that act as a trap for the mineralizing fluids. The unit itself is composed of conglomerates and sandstones, and the only places in which they compose the bedrock of the area is in the large regional synclines, like the Shudi-Ura syncline to the west of the Sumeb mine. So now that we understand the local and regional geology of the Otavi mountainlands, we can ask the question, how do we get the formation of the economic mineralization that makes the place so special? And the answer is, it depends slightly based off of which deposit you're looking at, but for the most part they all have similarities. So for this case we'll look at two different deposits, one being the more famous Sumeb deposit, which represents the bulk of the mineralization in the area, and the second being the Shudi, which is the deposit that we will be touring that is a little bit special. So when we're looking at the Sumeb deposit, the first thing to start off with is the Otavi carbonates. The Otavi carbonates are the bulk of the bedrock in the area and the primary rock unit in the Otavi mountainlands. But as carbonates tend to do in hot and humid environments, they form karsts. These karsts specifically form from the bottom up, with subterranean dissolution starting, and then they work their way upwards. This is important because it produces a clean void that is then infilled by the Malden subclassics. This is how you get the pipes that the Sumeb deposit is known for. And it's these pipes that act as the fluid trap for the subsequent fluids. Now, there are two types of fluids in this area. The first is your basal fluids. This represents the kind you get in Berg-Alkes, where you have lead and zinc. These are low temperature saline fluids. They're basically MVT brine basal fluids. The second is your hotter orogenic fluids that are rich in lead, copper, zinc, and germanium that we see in Sumeb. These fluids then permeate into the pipe, and this is where they form the zones of hypogene mineralization. Now, the conditions that formed the karsts in the first place haven't changed, so we still have continual meteoric fluids flowing into and interacting with the deposit. This then takes the primary sulfides and oxidizes them, which forms your zones of high-grade supergene enrichment. This is also what forms the really gorgeous mineral samples that you see within the Sumeb deposit. Now, the Shudi deposit is a bit different from this. While the deposits are hosted within the Malden silicics, they're not quite hosted in the Malden Formation itself. They're fundamentally reliant on the carbonate as a host rock, and it's the karsting of the carbonate unit that allows these deposits to form. But Shudi is a bit different. Instead, it exists solely within the Malden Formation. So how do we get that forming? How is it created? We start off with the structure. The Malden group, the Malden group is not the primary bedrock of the area. The primary bedrock is, as we mentioned before, the carbonate. The Malden only forms bedrock within these synclines. So in this case, this is the Shudi Urus syncline. With the south and the north. Now, the bedrock, or the core of these folds is the Malden. Beneath it is the carbonate. Now, as the orogenic fluids flow through, in the case of the Shudi deposit, they get trapped in the southern limb of the syncline. And it's here that they permeate into the Malden, and it's here that they encounter diagenetic pyrite within the siliclastics, which forms your hypogene sulfides. Now, when we break the deposit up, there's three primary zones to it. At the base, you have your sulfides. This represents your hypogene enrichment. This is what forms from the fluid interaction from the orogenic copper-rich fluids. And the diagenetic pyrite, which is providing reduced sulfur. Above that, we have the transition zone. This represents a mix of oxides and sulfides. The depth at which the transition occurs varies, but it's usually around 50 to 75 meters deep. And at the top, we have the oxides. These represent your supergene phase, which form from meteoric fluid interactions with the hypogene phase. Now, that's our main zonation, but the sulfide zonation is actually, or the sulfide zone is zoned on its own. As we go up, we gain iron. The Malden group is richer in iron, or the Shudi deposit, the Shudi formation, is richer in iron as depth decreases. So at the top, you have your iron sulfides. Then we have copper iron sulfides, chalcopyrite and bornite. And then as depth increases, we lose the iron and we form primarily chalcocite and copalite, your copper sulfides alone. Now, this area here, this area of hypogene enrichment, is not terribly rich on its own. It's very similar to porphyry copper deposits, where you get fairly low-grade copper, but it's from that supergene enrichment that really, really makes this worth mining, because the malachite is so, as far as weight percent goes, rich in copper, that it's phenomenal to mine. It's really, really, really rich in copper. But yeah, that's all I've got.